Have you ever wondered what would happen if experts finally cracked the Zodiac Killer's ciphers using modern science? For decades, people believed those symbols were either unsolvable or simply the taunts of a man who enjoyed toying with the world. But once researchers brought in new decoding tools, they uncovered details that weren't visible before. Each line revealed patterns that raised more questions than answers. And when the team reached the final sections, what they uncovered left even experienced analysts unsettled. Keep watching as we uncover what scientists found when they finally analyzed the Zodiac Killer's ciphers.
Never caught the Zodiac Killer.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's part of what.
The official investigation remains open. Public interest has remained high. Countless theories have gained traction over the years, pointing a finger at various men who share physical markers or specific interests with the famed killer.
They did crack the code, though, but
They did?
I don't think they know who he is.
Between 1968 and 1969, a man appeared in Northern California who frightened the region and confused the world. The Zodiac Killer wasn't only a murderer, he used psychological pressure to create fear. He brought dread to the Bay Area, a place normally known for its open culture instead of cold violence. But from Christmas 1968 through the early 1970s, fear could be felt in every parked car and during every late-night walk. The first confirmed Zodiac murders took place on December 20th, 1968, when teenagers Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday were shot while sitting in a parked car on a quiet road in Vallejo, California. Only 7 months later, on July 4th, 1969, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau were attacked in a similar way. Mageau survived and later described a heavy-set man in dark clothing who shot them without warning. Then on September 27th, 1969, the killer increased his level of violence. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were spending time at Lake Berryessa when a man wearing a hood approached them with a gun and a written message. He tied them up and stabbed them several times. Shepard later passed away from her injuries. This attack marked the first time the Zodiac symbol, a circle with a cross, was left at the scene. Finally, on October 11th, 1969, cab driver Paul Stein was shot in the head in San Francisco's Presidio Heights neighborhood. In this case, the killer wiped surfaces inside the cab and took Stein's wallet, then mailed a piece of Stein's bloody shirt to the San Francisco Chronicle, daring the police to find him. What made the Zodiac so frightening wasn't only the violence of his attacks, but his insistence on being noticed. He mailed more than 20 letters to Bay Area newspapers, each signed with his unsettling crosshair symbol. Several included cryptograms, including the famous 340 cipher, which stayed unsolved until 2020. He claimed responsibility for 37 killings. He threatened to blow up school buses. He demanded that newspapers publish his letters or more people would die. The Zodiac placed himself in front of the public, taunting police, mocking victims, and playing with the fear of an entire region. The Zodiac Killer eventually became a dark sort of celebrity. There's even an internet joke suggesting Ted Cruz is actually the Zodiac Killer. Books, documentaries, and movies like the 2007 film Zodiac only added to the mystery to some. He represented pure evil. To others, he was a puzzle waiting to be solved. But one thing stayed the same. The Zodiac Killer didn't just take lives, he changed the culture around him. Arthur Lee Allen, the first major suspect. When investigators began connecting details in the Zodiac case, one name stood out more than any other. Arthur Lee Allen, born in 1933 and raised in California, Allen's background looked, at least on paper, like it matched the Zodiac profile almost too well. He was a Navy veteran who had been dishonorably discharged in 1958 and was considered intelligent, but deeply unstable. He studied biology at Vallejo College and later worked as an elementary school teacher until he was fired in 1968 for molesting a student. Allen lived in Vallejo, a city close to several Zodiac crime scenes and one that appeared in the killer's letters. He knew every area the Zodiac moved through, and he was known for unpredictable behavior and disturbing interests. Friends later said, Allen often talked about how he would commit the perfect murder. He reportedly told someone he wanted to kill strangers, described using a flashlight taped to a gun, and even joked about calling himself Zodiac. Before the public knew the term, during a 1991 search of his home, police found explosives, pornographic materials, tapes involving child sexual exploitation, and a large number of firearms. More disturbing was a Zodiac brand wristwatch with the same crosshair logo used by the killer. But even with all these warning signs, nothing ever solidified the case against Allen. Police searched his home in 1972 and again in 1991. During questioning, he was defensive but denied being involved. Many officers believed privately that he was their man, but they lacked the final piece of evidence. In his most famous interview, Allen dodged questions and claimed he knew nothing about codes, despite having a close friend who was a known code expert. His responses raised suspicion, but investigators could not link him directly to the Zodiac letters or murders. In the end, scientific findings weakened the case against Allen. Handwriting specialists concluded that his writing didn't match the Zodiac letters. DNA taken from stamps and envelopes, while not perfect, didn't match him either. Fingerprints from the scenes didn't point to him. He even had alibis for at least one confirmed Zodiac attack. So while the circumstantial clues were disturbing, they remained only that. Circumstantial. When Allen died from a heart attack in 1992, some officers thought the Zodiac mystery had died with him. But without solid evidence, he was never officially tied to the crimes. He became the prime suspect who was never charged, leaving investigators and true crime followers frustrated for decades. Ross Sullivan, the Riverside Connection. Another notable but lesser-known suspect was Ross Sullivan, a tall and unsettling library assistant who may have been linked to the 1966 murder of Sherry Jo Bates in Riverside, California. Bates was stabbed to death near a college library, and her case shared clear similarities with the Zodiac's later attacks. A handwritten letter with a taunting tone was sent to local police and newspapers, signed with a mysterious Z. While never officially confirmed as a Zodiac murder, some investigators believe this may have been his first attack. Sullivan worked at the same library where Bates was last seen. He disappeared shortly after the murder and reappeared months later. He looked strikingly similar to Zodiac sketches: tall, heavy-set, and often wearing military-style clothing, including boots, like the ones linked to one of the Zodiac crime scenes. People who knew him described him as smart but unnerving. He was reportedly schizophrenic and had been institutionalized multiple times. He wrote strange poetry, loved codes, and often talked about dark, disturbing topics. Sullivan also had longtime family ties in California and may have been in the Bay Area. While the Zodiac was active, his behavior made him a serious person of interest, and his eerie demeanor only encouraged speculation. Still, nothing concrete ever tied Sullivan to the Zodiac. There was no physical evidence, no fingerprints, no verified DNA from him. He reportedly had an alibi for the 1969 Bay Area attacks. By the time Zodiac letters were being published, Sullivan had been moving in and out of psychiatric hospitals, which may have limited how closely he was examined. Although some amateur investigators still believe he may have been the killer, Sullivan has largely faded into a side story in the Zodiac legend. His name appears now and then, but interest in him never fully reignited. Other noteworthy suspects. Over the years, the Zodiac investigation has produced a long list of suspects, some credible, others far-fetched. While Arthur Lee Allen and Ross Sullivan remain the most discussed, several other individuals have gained attention, especially recently. Gary Francis Post. In 2021, a group calling themselves the Case Breakers claimed the Zodiac Killer was Gary Francis Post, an Air Force veteran and house painter who died in 2018. They pointed to cryptic messages, scars on his forehead, that looked like the police sketch, and his supposed military background. But law enforcement rejected the claim, saying there was no solid evidence, no DNA, no handwriting match, nothing verifiable. Many people saw the announcement as more publicity than proof. Lawrence Caney. A traveling salesman with a troubled history, Lawrence Kane had a background of stalking women and had suffered a brain injury that reportedly changed his behavior. He lived near some Zodiac crime scenes and resembled the police sketch. A sister of victim Darlene Farron even claimed Caney had followed her, but there was no solid evidence tying him to the murders, and investigators couldn't fill in the missing pieces in his timeline. Paul Doerr. A less familiar name, Paul Doerr was an anti-government writer and libertarian activist who enjoyed working with ciphers. Some amateur sleuths noted similarities between his writing style and the Zodiac letters. But without forensic support or a clear motive, the theory remained only speculation based on coincidences. Each of these suspects had traits that matched some part of the Zodiac profile, but none had everything: motive, means, opportunity, and physical evidence. Investigators learned repeatedly that disturbing similarities and circumstantial clues weren't enough to solve the case. This is what made the next development so surprising. A new name began to circulate, sending a wave of interest through the true crime community. The MAC. A new name emerges. For more than 50 years, the Zodiac Killer's identity has hung over American true crime history like a lingering shadow. Despite thousands of leads, countless suspects, and continuing public fascination, the person behind the murders and ciphers has never been officially identified. But now, a new theory is gaining attention. It centers on a name rarely mentioned, one that some believe could finally provide answers to one of the country's most puzzling cold cases. That name is William McDuff Andrew, known to those who met him simply as the Mac. This emerging suspect was brought into the spotlight by Mike Morford, a respected true crime researcher and co-host of the Zodiac speaking podcast Morford, who has spent years studying the Zodiac's cryptic letters, witness accounts, and public documents. Believes Andrew deserves serious attention when you start looking into William McDuff. Andrew, Morford has said, you can't help but feel that uneasy pull in your stomach. He doesn't just match one or two details, he matches almost all of them. William McDuff Andrew was born in California in the early 1930s and grew up in the Bay Area, the same region where the Zodiac would later terrorize communities. After finishing high school, Andrew served in the U.S. Air Force during the Korean War. Military records show that he had a strong skill set in cryptography, radio operation, and aerial navigation. These are not just rare skills. They closely resemble the abilities needed to create the Zodiac's infamous coded messages. When he returned to civilian life, Andrew went back to Northern California and worked for a period as a typesetter at a San Francisco newspaper. Looking back, this job gave him direct access to printing tools and the kind of language manipulation that appeared in the Zodiac's letters. Andrew's lifestyle was unusual and withdrawn. He moved often, used different aliases, had almost no close friends, and kept an odd attachment to military clothing long after his service ended. People reported seeing him walking around Vallejo and the Lake Berryessa area, both linked to Zodiac crime scenes, although hardly anyone thought anything strange about it at the time. One former co-worker said that Andrew was obsessed with secret codes and would fill small notebooks with strange symbols during lunch breaks. He was described as very private, prone to sudden outbursts, and often stared into space while quietly mumbling. The behavioral similarities between Andrew and the Zodiac Killer are difficult to ignore. In addition to his cryptographic background and presence in the Bay Area, Andrew had the psychological profile many experts believe fits the Zodiac. Later in life, he was reportedly institutionalized for what one psychiatric report described as paranoid delusions with violent thoughts. A nurse said she read some of Andrew's writings and was so unsettled by their violent and cryptic content that she filed a formal concern with the hospital director, though nothing was ever documented afterward. The coincidences continue. Morford says Andrew was known to a small group of acquaintances as the Mac, a nickname that appears in a mysterious 1969 prison letter. In that letter, intercepted but never officially tied to the Zodiac, someone calling themselves Mac describes killing for excitement. The writing style, pacing, and cryptic tone were strikingly similar to confirmed Zodiac letters. At the time, the letter was dismissed as a hoax. Now, with Andrew's background in mind, researchers are looking at it again. Another interesting detail involves a letter sent to the Vallejo Times-Herald in 1971. Widely dismissed at the time as an imitation, that envelope was later digitized and re-examined, and a partial fingerprint was found. Although a complete match to the Zodiac's known prints hasn't been confirmed, forensic analysts reported a high probability partial match when compared to prints found on earlier Zodiac letters. The sender of that envelope was never identified. Some researchers think it may have been Andrew, but even with these compelling details, the theory does come with problems. First, no direct DNA evidence connects Andrew to the Zodiac crimes. His DNA was never entered into federal databases, and any biological samples that could confirm or rule him out may have been discarded after his death in 1996. Without a living relative willing to submit DNA or a preserved personal item containing usable genetic material, that path remains blocked. There are also no known handwriting samples from Andrew, making any comparison to the Zodiac's writing nearly impossible. Unlike Arthur Lee Allen, whose handwriting was examined and controversially dismissed, Andrew left behind very little paperwork. His time in mental institutions and his habit of moving under different names make it even harder to gather records or find people who knew him well. On top of that, no surviving witness from the Zodiac's crimes ever identified anyone resembling Andrew in sketches or lineups. Skeptics argue that Andrew's scattered life makes it tough to draw firm conclusions. Much of what is known comes from scattered reports or incomplete government documents. Still, Morford believes the circumstantial evidence is strong enough to justify further investigation. "I don't want to be another guy crying wolf," he says, "but when everything fits this closely, you at least owe it to the case to look deeper." What makes Andrew especially disturbing as a suspect is that he wasn't well known or flashy. He was just another man drifting through Northern California. A loner, a drifter, a face no one paid attention to. That alone makes him more frightening than a headline-making criminal. Because if the Zodiac was someone like Andrew, it means people may have walked past him and never realized it. It means the most notorious killer in modern American history might have disappeared quietly, taking his secrets to the grave. So could the key to the Zodiac mystery lie with a man history nearly erased? If William McDuff Andrew was the Zodiac, then this story isn't only about a killer who evaded the system. It's about the unsettling idea that some predators don't hide in darkness. They blend in with everyone else. Why the Zodiac case remains open even after all these decades, the Zodiac Killer case is still officially open. Leads have dwindled and witnesses have either aged or passed away. But investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths still feel that resolution is close. Yet time continues to wear away the physical evidence and living memories that once seemed promising. The biggest issue is forensic deterioration. Many of the Zodiac's letters and envelopes were handled without gloves, incorrectly stored, or contaminated long before DNA technology existed, while partial DNA has been pulled from stamps and saliva. Nothing has produced a confirmed match. Authorities have run these samples through several databases, including CODIS and genealogical archives, without any solid results. Handwriting analysis is also a problem, as experts disagree on how dependable it truly is. In the Zodiac investigation, handwriting comparisons have both supported and dismissed suspects like Arthur Lee Allen, depending on the analyst. The Zodiac's fingerprints, partial, blurred, and incomplete, remain some of the most frustrating pieces of evidence. One print lifted from the taxi in the Paul Stein murder has long been considered possibly Zodiac's, but even that is disputed. No one is certain whether it belonged to the killer, the victim, or someone else entirely. So what keeps this case alive if so much evidence is unclear? In reality, it's not only about solving old murders. The Zodiac has become a symbol of unfinished justice. He taunted the public, mocked police, and claimed he would keep killing, then disappeared without ever being caught. That unresolved fear, that hole in American memory, has kept the fascination burning. Books, documentaries, podcasts, and films have all tried to crack the case, bringing new theories and new suspects, which adds more public pressure on investigators. Even modern detectives are split. Some think the Zodiac is long dead and that chasing him now takes attention away from current cases. Others argue that the killer's identity, whether it's Andrew, Ross Sullivan, or someone no one has named yet, must be confirmed before the case is considered closed. Because if he escaped justice once, someone else might try to learn from that what's next. The search for proof. The Zodiac Killer case remains one of the most haunting unsolved crimes in the country. With suspects like Andrew resurfacing, the question isn't only who he was, but whether we will ever know for certain. So what comes next? One promising direction is genealogical DNA, the same method that caught the Golden State Killer in 2018. Even though the Zodiac case has only produced partial DNA from stamps and envelopes, more advanced testing may make those samples useful. Even degraded samples can sometimes be linked to family trees, which could narrow down suspects like Andrew or Allen. But this would require law enforcement to allow retesting, something they haven't agreed to without strong justification. Another growing approach involves deep research into public records. Independent investigators like Mike Morford are digging through employment files, military records, real estate documents, and even hospital logs to trace suspects like the Mac and see if they were near Zodiac crime locations. For example, if Andrew worked at a naval base near Vallejo in late 1968 or lived close to Lake Berryessa in 1969, that would significantly strengthen the theory these records take time to chase down, but they may provide the missing links necessary to move the case forward. This leads to a final unsettling question that lingers over the entire investigation. What if we never learn who the Zodiac was? Could we accept that uncertainty? Could we accept that one of the most well-known killers in American history may stay unidentified forever? Or is the true fear not in his identity, but in the idea that he managed to manipulate the entire country and then simply disappear? Mike Morford leaves us with a thought many people can't shake. Maybe the Zodiac isn't only a man. Maybe he represents how exposed we all are to danger, disorder, and the unknown. So now we ask you, do you think William McDuff Andrew the Mac was the Zodiac Killer? Or is he just the latest name added to a long and unsettling list of possible suspects? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.